This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Well, to the world at large, we have Respectonomics today with an unusual twist. This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, the voice of Respectonomics, and as listeners well know, my co-host is Sarah Benton, who is away today. And we have today Abby Errington. Abby Errington is going to be wouldn't call him my co-host, I'm going to call him my leader, because Abby has a world-standing expertise in governance. And we're going to be talking about governance. I'm going to let Abby explain a little bit of his history of how he came into it. And I think most listeners will be delighted to know this morning or today that in actual fact, Abby will doing most of the talking and Jeremy will not. So you should be relieved. Abby, into the world at large, and I always say to the world at large because people listen to this globally and domestically and who knows when and where. So it's a little trite almost to say good morning, but the truth of the matter is we are good morning, and I will say good morning, Abby.
Good morning, Jeremy. It's good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to explain? You might like actually to explain how on the earth we even met.
Well, besides, I have a deep immersion into governance, which goes back to a bit of my history. I'm actually in the tourism industry. I grew up in the tourism industry. I've been in the tourism industry since I was a teenager. And part of that, at one point, I ended up being elected to the presidency of Ontario, Canada's nature and outdoor tourism industry. And I had to learn governance under some fairly challenging circumstances, and I became fascinated. And so for the last 20 years, I started developing some of my own tools in order to train my own board of directors and was encouraged to keep developing them. And over the last 20 years, I've developed a very straightforward approach to governance analysis and education that's works very well. So I work with boards of directors in on the throughout the my off season and stuff like that. And like I said, my approach has been I've come to accept actually the foundational aspects of governance that I work with. I'm probably about the best there is. It depresses
I
me
always
because
like hearing that.
a
I
lot.
love Abby. That's my tune. The best that we are. It can't be better
Yes,
than.
and I don't like it that I am, but I've come to accept it because there should be a lot of people a lot better at it than I am, but we are really not very good at governance as a species.
Listen, before we go into the meat and potatoes of what you're talking about, I think under the heading of full disclosure, it would be interesting for listeners to know that you and I met at your resort. As you rightly point out, it's been your lifelong history of being in the resort business. But we met because you and your wife own the fishing lodge, the fishing resort where I first met you. And
Yes,
well, listeners ought to know one thing. We met, and most times when you go to a fish resort, you're going to talk about the fishing or whatever. You were talking about governance within about 3 seconds of our meeting. And I remember my fishing partner rolling his eyes and thinking, oh dear, there goes Jeremy. And it's been a wonderful relationship. And I deeply thank you. And I think our listeners will thank you as well, because you're absolutely right. You do have this world scale expertise in governance. And you make an interesting comment, and that is you really shouldn't be the best. There should be more people that are the best or more people that are good at it. And I think that's the gap that I want you to talk about this morning, where you see governance has, should we say, failed, where it has failed to emerge. I'm passing the reins over to you here, Abby, but I think it's important for people to understand almost, you've explained how you came into it, but now talk about your observations, where you see the governance issue needs to be taken.
well, like I said, I mean, my initiation into governance was taking over the leadership of an organization that was very important, but had extremely poor governance. I didn't realize that at the point in time. But over a couple of years, we straightened out the governance in our own organization. But I mean, the organization's reason for existing was to actually influence government. I was a registered lobbyist for 6 years, and I had great conversations with a lot of government, very high level government officials, including elected and ministers and stuff like that. And we'd have great conversations, and very little good happened. And I started looking at government from a governance perspective, and I realized government governance is really, really bad and getting worse.
Abby, may I interrupt you on one point here, please? When I first met you, and we've talked a lot about this, can you talk a little more about the difference between government and governance? Because I think people use the words almost like they're sort of, confetti and throw them around. So you give us that explanation of what government is, should be, governance is or should be.
Yes, actually, and you're right, Jeremy. That is a huge part of the problem. That a lot of the confusion on governance and is misuse of the term. Government is an organization. It is an organization that takes care of our infrastructure and services, and that we all need. Governance is in every organization, good, bad, or indifferent. Actually, it's the structure and processes of delegation and accountability in any organization. And it doesn't even have to be a formal organization. Families have governance, even people have governance. It's about how you figure out the processes of how you get things done, how you delegate things, how you hold things accountable, delegations accountable. That's essentially what it is. Keeping focused on what the purpose of the organization, or even what your own life is, so that you are successful in achieving those purposes. And governments have the worst governance. Actually, they're the only term you can in governments it can be termed as bad, worse, and really bad. Um, and unfortunately, globally, actually, we're sliding towards really bad,
Okay.
and that's where
There are
politics is taking us.
yeah, there are three words you mention in your build up of governance. You talk about purpose, you talk about accountability, and sorry, what was the third one? There's a third one you mentioned. Sorry, just slipped my mind.
Delegation.
Delegation. Can you, I don't know which order you want to do this in, but when you very reasonably talk about getting things done. And I mean, I'm short-circuiting you here, but I think most people today have this inner feeling, this observation that things don't get done. They're well aware of government and that sort of the broad sense of, political parties and all that stuff. But getting things done seems to be an absolute, mystery.
Yeah, and it's because, tell you the truth, in some ways they are getting things done because our governments are largely hijacked by politics, political parties, and bureaucracy, and increasingly so. So they're getting things done, but not what done. I mean, when it comes down to it, governments belong to us. Governments start as just mechanisms of cooperation on common needs. I mean, I would think our cave ancestors probably cooperated in regard to defense from like saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that, gathering food, maintaining trails, maybe making small vessels like dugout canoes and stuff like that. So in order to cooperate on those common needs, you need a structure, an organization. That's all an organization really is a focus of cooperation to achieve or support a purpose. That's it. And so you put these organizations together, which I would say would be not democracy, because to me democracy is an organization that serves its people. and to get things done, to get these common needs taken care of, these infrastructure and services that we commonly need taken care of. Unfortunately, about that time, and probably our cave ancestors invented this too, they invented politics to corrupt and take it over, to make sure to take the change the purpose from serving the broader good on stuff we commonly need to serving power, for want of another thing. And
Abby,
with power
yeah,
came, yeah, with
so
power comes wealth and privilege.
you mentioned something there about politics and how that the fundamental process of of looking after ourselves and, defense and all those things. But you mentioned two words almost in the same paragraph, same sentence, politics and corruption. And
Yes, because politics is
I'd
corruption.
like you to expand on that, please.
Sure. Politics is the opportunistic tendencies that some people who are, I mean, we're an opportunistic species. So if there's an opportunity to get more for ourselves, we tend to take it. Most of us would not want to hurt others when we do that, but a lot of us don't care about that. So politics is the opportunism that is allowed and supported by poor governance. And it's just taking advantage if there's an opportunity to erode or manipulate delegation and accountability. Some of us will take it. And if we're not paying attention, our organizations get hijacked in order to serve other purposes other than what we really need it to serve.
I think your observation is that this hijacking process is actually in full, what would you call it? In full flight. It's really happening.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
it always happens. I mean, we're an opportunistic species, so I mean, it's the opportunism is always going to be there. It's just we don't have the governance to keep it in check. I mean, the opportunism is part of human nature. So we have to have mechanisms and pay attention to keep it in check, and we are not. So it's getting actually worse. I mean, I look in my life, in our lifetime, and politics has become increasingly polarized, and there's very little of duty left in it. It's all about serving the politics and the power of the politics. And I would say back, if you go back a few decades, there would be more of a sense of duty towards the people that government is supposed to be serving, namely us. Um, but now there's less and less because it's basically become Hatfields and McCoys, where it's a constant feud over who's going to be in control of government, and that means that it's constant. Instead of serving us, they're serving whatever interest they need to hold on to power. And that's just and every government in the world is doing that. Uh, Canada, I'd say, is probably one of the less worst, but it's every government in the world is sliding more and more towards authoritarianism and uh, aristocracy, basically elected aristocracies more than servants.
You're not attacking aristocracy, are you?
Um, aristocracy, it's what I call it is, and I've talked to you about it, is it's
Yeah,
parasitism actually,
yeah,
and the
yeah.
aristocracies are they can be somewhat symbiotic, but but aristocracies tend to be parasitic. Actually, they're taking value from everybody else and just squandering it from themselves for no other reason than they're in a position of control
I
over
think,
the system.
Abby, why don't you expand a bit? It's a word you've used a lot with me, and that is this word of being parasitical. It's almost like, I mean, it's a biological expression, but explain how you see the parasite in the world of government.
Well, it's not government only government; it's the whole a whole socioeconomic system. Parasites are entities that extract value through through abuse and exploitation rather than creating value. And in a socioeconomic system, we have increasing amounts of parasitic organizations and people, including politics. Politics is a parasitic industry. Its sole reason for the purpose of politics is to get control, and for that to happen, it has to use abuse and exploitation to manipulate and get loyalty and basically have control over the system through systems of corruption, basically. And people don't maybe think about corrupt our system as being corrupt because we're electing these people, but how much
Mm.
how valid is that when actually the political parties are actually in control of the electoral systems, and then control of the people who are being elected, because since for the last quite number of decades, the political parties have really controlled the ballot. That wasn't the case like 60, 70 years ago when the
I'm going
political
to take
parties
you
were
up
not
on,
allowed on the ballot.
I'm going to take you up on one point you make because I'm going back in my own life history. And my family back in England was, I will say, political in the sense of, staunchly conservative and all that stuff. And our house was always, there was always some MP or cabinet minister coming through the hallways. But what was interesting was I have one about, and I don't think I'm looking through rosy-colored spectacles. I want your opinion on this.
Mhm.
But I think those individuals, their sense was, it always came across to me anyway, as God, King, and country. I never got the sense of control. I just didn't. Now, and maybe because I was 10 years old and they were 60, I don't know, maybe that was it. But actually, no, if it was I was 10 and they were 60, you'd think control would be the big thing. I never felt that.
There, it is control, because what was happening is that they knew that their system depended on. They recognize, I would say that they deep down they recognize that they don't control or own the government. People always own the government. We are not smart about how we own the government, but and that is why. But that is why when we revolutions happen, because revolutions happen when the aristocracy becomes so parasitic to its people that the people just say that's enough, and then they rebel. But we never put a good governance system in place to replace the old one of embedded aristocracies. But the aristocrats, for the most part, and really recognized that they needed to respect the people that the government needed to serve in order to keep their place in that system. If they didn't, they would be kicked out, because there was really no real reason for them to be there other than to maintain that system.
Hmm. Abby, you talk about this business of government and governance from the standpoint of you have a lousy government, they get kicked out, people rebel, and all those things. In a in a world today, you know what? I think you're articulating what people actually feel. They
Mhm.
feel out of touch. They feel that their voice doesn't count. They don't feel they're properly represented. I mean, these may sound sort of, throwaway lines, but deeply, I think that's where people's hearts are these days. So, from your standpoint, when you look, you've explained the risks of government and its embedded failure, if you will. Tell us about governance and how it ought to work. And I don't mean to model it in Canada or the United States or France or anybody, but just take us through. You've got a country with, X million people in it. What does governance do to bring those people's interests together?
Well, it comes down to a very simple thing, actually. Every organization, including governments, are a focus of cooperation to achieve or support a purpose. And I don't know of any government in the world that really expresses that the reason for existence of the organization of government. When it comes right down to it, from a governance perspective, we absolutely do not need governments. We need roads, we need schools, we need hospitals, we need protections from abuse and exploitation, such as police and military. In order to have that, we need an organizational structure to pool our resources, such as taxes, in order to build and maintain those infrastructure and services. And but that's not expressed in government. Government thinks that government puts forward that it is an important thing to maintain, but it isn't actually. If we're not getting the infrastructure and services that is the purpose that we have government for, then what do we need government for? We still have the need of the infrastructure and services, but that doesn't correlate into a need for for the particular organization if it's not going to give those to us. So, and that's with any organization.
Okay.
Every single organization is like that.
Yeah. I mean, technically, and I say technically because the framework you've suggested makes absolute sense that the government provides me with the roads and the railways and defense and those things that I need to get on with my life. So we'll call it government for the organizationally, just so that it's
So we stay
probably
focused.
yeah. But let's talk about the governance that you envisage. How would it, in a very pragmatic way? I mean, to the best of my knowledge, every country that calls itself a democracy has some kind of system of, an executive arm and all the other ones, the judiciary and so on and so on, and they're all voting mechanisms. Take us into the world of where the governance that you're talking about could in fact take place.
Well, first of all, we have to absolutely reject the political statement that democracy is voting, because it's not. Voting elections, they are governance tools of delegation. That's all they are. They are not a democratic process. It's not that you do need elections to have a democracy, but just because you have elections does not mean you have a democracy. And we do not have
Say
democracy.
that again. Say that again.
Okay, just because you have elections doesn't mean you have democracy. Correlating uh, elections with democracy is a political manipulation. They don't correlate. Um, uh, the the an organization Elections are a governance tool of delegation. That's all they are. And before you delegate, you have to decide what you are delegating. We don't. We as a people don't. We don't say that we want the infrastructure and services that we all need. We just say, "Okay, lead us." And that and
Uh,
that actually, therein lies the problem actually. And that's the problem is us. We are a tribal species. We want to be led. We want to be part of a tribe. It's part of our instinct from our cave ancestors to be part of a tribe. And tribalism has been an asset to our species, but it's one of our greatest weakness because it allows others to lead us into whatever pit of despair they can at times because we're actually not that picky about leaders. We're looking for charismatic leaders and stuff like that. So tribalism is actually which I mean, that's what politics is. It's just toxic tribalism. But tribalism is what leads us into where we are currently heading, actually. And we need to have enough governance knowledge to resist the worst aspects of tribalism.
I'm going to pick you up on one point you mentioned there, governance knowledge. I will confess to you that with all my background, experience, education, and so on, it really wasn't until I met you 3 or 4 years ago that I even began to understand the rubrics of governance. And I would say at the moment, I'm probably not even past the front cover. What I want you to tell us about, how do we get people to understand, to learn governance? Where does it start?
Well, I mean, people are intimidated by the whole concept of governance because they think about things like, well, for one thing, Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure and all that. And I tell them just forget about that. Actually, if even in a board of directors, you really don't need to know much about that because those are not governance. Those are governance tools. Governance can be very complex, especially including in a complex organization such as government. However, it is always, always, always straightforward. The organizations, the organization exists to achieve or support a purpose. And what has to come from its people, the people it's going to serve, is what is that purpose? And it's always a combination of support and protection. And that's what it is. A proper democracy is an organization that supports broad opportunity for its people and protects all its people from abuse and exploitation. And that's it. Unfortunately, for people who want to lead, that's not enough. They want it to be more than that because then they can't justify the wealth and privilege they're trying to extract from the system.
I want to pick you up on something here. In a podcast to follow, I'm going to be doing a discussion on vision, and you've just talked about purpose, and I'm not going to sort of put the two what I call against each other. But what I am going to say is this: one of the things I have discovered is, and you've kind of alluded to it, you talk about the purpose of an organization. And what I have found is the number of leaders who tell me what the purpose is, they do not ask me what my purpose is.
Yeah, although actually I would say, and that gets back to philosophically, what is the purpose of life? And
Right.
my philosophy is the purpose of life is to live.
Yeah.
Live, be happy,
Right.
whatever makes you happy and stuff like that. And that really fundamentally is. I've thought about that a number of times over the years, but that's what I've come up with. There is no there is no real other purpose than that, no higher philosophy and stuff, um, other than to live and
Okay.
live well.
But to take your point, though, I have to agree with that. But what I'm also looking at is this sense of purpose in that you talk about government, and we keep coming back to the word government. We have this sense of purpose that we are given. I find it remarkable that I, as a constituent, a voter, an individual, have never been asked about my sense of purpose or what the purpose of the leader should be. I've just never been asked that. It's always been imposed on me.
Yep, and that it comes back to some of your philosophy is a lack of respect. The people who are in control of our government's governance don't respect us. We are a source of power, we're a source of wealth, we're a source of privilege, and for them, they have twisted the governance of governance. So the purpose is not to serve us, but to serve them. And we're just a mechanism of service for them. And
Well,
when it gets too bad, we will rebel.
yeah. One of the things I want to pick up again on is you talk about um, understanding governance and so on educationally. So, in other words, a lot of what you're talking about is, and for me and for listeners, is all to do with being educated in the process of governance and so on. Where does that education start?
Well, actually, I've taught it in high schools. I find it very good. The perspective I teach in high schools is the uptake is extremely good because I go back to the same thing the straightforward fundamental. The organization exists to achieve and support a purpose. And if you are elected to a position of responsibility, and that's your job is to keep it focused on that purpose. It's there's a definition that purpose is the foundational definition of success of that organization, whether it's government or otherwise. And then what you do from there is capacity build and to achieve that purpose. And so that's what my tools are about. And the kids pick it up really, really well. I really enjoy that. And so I've actually developed a lesson plans for high schools, which is kind of exciting.
I mean, just as a macro comment, would you say that the educational system does not address or does address governance? Where do you feel that is? I mean, I see what you're doing.
Yeah, absolute failure, actually. And there are some education of governance in the legal and accounting professions. A lot of that is around process, though, instead of the fundamentals of why the ex organization exists. But yeah, there's absolutely no real good education in governance, and a lot of even people in my field, which are is governance consulting, get it wrong, and they're actually kind of self-serving in regard to into governance because they do a lot of the consulting around processes instead of why does the organization exist, and we get back into those real foundational that you build from there and once you get into that part, the rest is actually pretty easy.
But then I think you'll agree that most people, when they hear the words government and democracy and votes, they think, oh, everything's okay. And what you're pointing out is no, those are just tools or mechanisms, whatever. The underlying truth must be governance. One thing you've talked to me about is good governance and bad governance, because governance sounds like a word that gets everything working well.
Yeah.
Give us an example of the good governance and then what can be bad governance.
Well, to tell you the truth, I've recently actually moved beyond that to the states of governance going from healthy to parasitic to toxic instead of good and bad. Because good and bad are can be very judgmental terms, and it's used a lot to justify mechanisms of governance over the actual outcomes. And healthy governance ensures that the organization um, is focused on achieving what the ownership expects, which is what it should be. Um, and parasitic governance is where the governance has been hijacked, which I mean, this is largely what we have. Um, uh, governments, our government actually serves politics and political parties over us, and the politics and political parties serve wealth, power, and privilege. And their ultimate goal of politics is always ruling. I mean, it's always been that. I mean, this thing of tribalism has been around forever. I mean, that's why we have a history of monarchs. Actually, is because that's was the ultimate goal is to take over these organizations that we all need for maintaining our roads, our schools, and stuff like that, and setting people up as essentially in a parasitic position to reap the benefits of the economy and just take it over, so that they can manipulate. So they basically, if they can maintain it well enough, and there is some benefit maybe in uh, uh, the old saying about having beneficial dictators or whatever. Um, but it's never sustainable long term because of the other old saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So at
Yeah.
some point, you always end up with a Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? So mentioned toxic. You went from governance to parasitical governance to the toxic governance. Is toxic where you see the ultimate North Korea?
Yes, North Korea is a toxic governance in government where um, the organization has been taken over to the extent where it is poisoning itself. It's poisoning the people it's supposed to serve. It's poisoning the everything. It's completely extractive. Its sole its sole reason for existing at this point is to benefit one person, and that person really doesn't look at the people of, say, North Korea as anything more than chattel. Not much better than cattle or sheep to be exploited.
In your studies, Abby, have you seen a direct linkage between this concept of the parasite and the development of the toxic environment? I mean, do you see those two going hand in hand, one leading to the other?
Yeah, because parasites always parasites actually harm what they exist off of,
Yes, they do.
and biologically as well as organizationally. Actually, parasites eventually kill the host if they are given enough resources to grow to being essentially cancerous. When you take a look at politics, I mean, it's basically a cancerous growth within our governance system, and political parties um, are just the rot actually that's happening. It's
Um, Abby, I think you, from both a technical point of view and I would then say pragmatic, I think you are putting us on a sort of at an intersection which has got a lot of flashing red lights at it. My feeling, and I don't mean belief, my feeling is that we're going into that intersection without really looking left and right. And the lights are flashing.
yes, and yeah,
Sorry.
there's been lots of flashing lights. I mean, we're this is a cyclic thing that we don't seem to the I mean the old saying, those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We what's happening in our economy, global economy and culture worldwide, was very strong with parallels to the early 1900s that are and the precursors of the First World War and the Great Depression. And we know we've been here before, but we don't want to stop it because we're tribal. We're just most of us will follow tribalism to wherever it leads until it's not sustainable anymore. And that's the cycle we have, the historical cycle we're in right now. We're heading to some very dark places. We could stop ourselves. Unfortunately, we probably won't. Um, and so we're it's but the warning signs are blatant actually there, and I think a lot of the reaction to it is actually making things worse. But I think deep down people do know that politics is toxic, and they know that politics is taking us in bad directions. But the reaction is more to that blame the other political tribes rather than the tribes that we belong to.
Okay. I'm going to throw down the gauntlet, and you were probably waiting for me to do this part. You really have outlined, not even outlined, you have very concisely, very clearly put forward the risks of where we are today, period. As you know, Respectonomics deals with one corridor, which is the issue of respecting, embracing the dignity of another human being, which effectively is what you're talking about
Hmm.
in a macro sense, I suppose. I think what listeners would like to know, I know you and I have talked about it, but if you were given that white sheet of paper and a quill pen, what in fact would you do to reverse course?
Um, it's difficult. I mean, the system is not necessarily. It has the aspects of good governance in it. It's been hijacked. Um, the big one that we have to deal with is politics and political parties, and we put them on pedestals, which is very bad because politics is a very parasitic industry. Its whole purpose is to corrupt the system to so that certain individuals and groups of individuals can extract value um, through abuse and exploitation. That is the purpose of politics. And some politicians, I know politicians and stuff like that, and so a lot of them mean well, but they're part of a system that is parasitic and is going to is causing great harm and it's going to get worse. We know that from history. So the biggest thing is we have to, we as a people have to rally around what good governance is. And that good governance is a government that serves its people with infrastructure and services that support broad opportunity for all its people and protect all its people from abuse and exploitation. That is our rally. Like I said, we have to stop being distracted by the complexity of governance and focus on what the outcomes we really need. And that comes down to a very, very simple vision of what success of government is, because we are the ones that need to be defining success. Defining success can't come from the politicians, and that is what we're allowing to happen. We have the politicians coming in front of us as, if you vote for me, I'll give you this and this and this and this, and then we're mad because we don't get those things.
Yeah.
Um, and the definition of success cannot come from the politicians. We have to say, this is what government's purpose is. Go in there, make sure it's done. So that's the biggest thing right there. The second thing is the elected officials have to be separated from the operations of government, because right now we have in our own system that the prime minister is essentially the CEO of government. So the prime minister is actually in control of their own accountability, which which shifts the accountability to the political party that they essentially serve. When you look at it from a governance perspective, that should be illegal, because it's illegal in boards of directors to do that. But with our politically oriented system, it's just taken as that's the way things are. And it's extremely tribal, because it's just and it's almost like each political party is an army of occupation, and they're fighting over who's going to be in control of the coffers for like 2 to 5 years, is what they're really doing, and
I'd like,
we don't need that kind of system.
Abby, you know that people listening to this will agree with you. That, I mean, intellectually, philosophically. But let's go one part. You mentioned once to me, and I know we're talking to a global audience, but I have a feeling that or an understanding that all democratically so-called work the same principle. What I'd like you talk about the risks of the party serving the party rather than the people. You've talked a bit
Hmm.
about that. You once mentioned to me that the voting procedure gets the person's is going to represent me as voted in, and that's fine. That individual then has to surrender their membership to a political party the day they go through the legislative door. Is that where you
Yeah.
still think we should?
Oh, for sure. Actually, political. I mean, theoretically, if you look at a board, and I'm going to make a parallel with boards of directors. If you go
Yeah, I
on to
want you to
board of
do that.
directors,
Yeah.
yeah, you cannot represent another organization when you're at the board of directors. It's a conflict of interest, and that's the same thing. When you look at what political parties are, they're essentially lobby organizations. The only difference really is, instead of influencing our elected officials, they're actually in control of them. Because really, you cannot get elected without belonging to a political party at this point. Not in our country, anyways. Independence may happen after an election, but they usually don't last very long, because the political parties want that control. They want all the seats they can get, because they really are an army of occupation. So
Okay.
it
This is very important because I think you've hit on another card, and that is the number of times we have seen the person that we want to, what that we are offered to vote for has actually been a delegation or a relegation from the party itself. In other words, they parachute in an individual for us to vote on. I have an issue with that because it
I
undercuts
have
the
a
very.
serious issue.
Okay. So if I'm going to be pragmatic, and this is, Jeremy Respectonomics, two things you've said. First of all, I think parties should no longer be allowed to parachute people into the constituency or the area of voting. That's the first thing. Secondly, I wonder what would happen if the proverbial leader prime minister said, You're more than welcome to come into the Parliament building to vote and to talk and negotiate and all those good things, but there shall be no party. I think it would
That
be a
would be brilliant.
brilliant, well, it would be. And I think from a national point of view, that is going to be the fastest way to bringing all of our contiguous interests to the table.
Yeah. Well, when you consider political parties as lobby organizations, they should once a person accepts a seat in parliament, they should automatically have to resign from all lobby organizations, including political parties. They
Well, that
can't be party to that. They have an overriding duty to the people of the country that they're there to ensure that the government serves.
isn't that true of a board of directors?
Yes, actually, if boards of directors did what Parliament does, they would all end up in jail, especially the party whip. The party whip, actually, to me, is one of the more bizarre governance things that is happening. The party of the whip should be automatically go to jail, go directly to jail, do not pass go. Just to actually, I mean, bribing and coercing a public official is currently, even in our system, illegal, and yet they do it all the time,
And yet they're doing it right in front of us.
right in front of us,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
considered business as
right,
usual for
right.
politics.
Abby, take us down. We've talked a bit about the voting procedure. We've talked a bit about the what happens when I get voted and I no longer belong to the party. Talk a bit about how the Prime Minister, the leader, in under the heading of a board of directors, how should the concept of accountability work?
Well, like I said, good governance really is effective, accountable delegation. So what we should be doing is the people vote for their elected representatives, which is
Right.
Parliament.
Fine.
Parliament is way too large to oversee an organization like to make effective decisions and stuff like that. That's why I mean, in governance circles, I mean, 12 is really the maximum effectiveness of a board of directors. After a while, after that, you just get too bogged down in process and stuff
Right.
like that. So when you look at it, Parliament is brilliant, but it really needs to delegate a subset of itself, possibly on a permanent basis. And we do have that body right now called the Privy Council. Um, and that's good as long as it's not as long as it's not hijacked by politics and political
Again,
parties,
yeah.
which it is now. But then the next thing is in healthy organizations, the the board of directors hires a CEO, and that is the probably one of the big flaws that allows a lot of the corruption. We do not really have a CEO of government. Some people will claim that the top bureaucrat is the CEO, but they're not. Not um, in
No.
our governance system. Actually, the CEO of government is the prime minister, the premier, president, whatever system they have, and it's elected. And the problem with somebody who's elected in a CEO position is you have to wait for an election to get rid of them. And one of the biggest value of hiring somebody for a position is that you can fire them if they do not meet expectations, if there's corruption, etc. You don't have to wait 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. And people will think that, electing the CEO of government is very democratic. It's not. It's really poor governance. You want to separate the oversight, which is Parliament's job, and Privy Council's job is oversight, from the actual achievement of the purpose of the organization, which is the bureaucracy and stuff like that. And when you don't have that separation, you get what you have right now, which is a lot of self-serving because the elected officials who have parts or who are in control of parts or the whole thing of government can manipulate it to their own needs, which are in this case, getting elected again. So they manipulate operations, and then the operations actually sets up barriers of process to protect themselves from the politics, and so you get a lot of bureaucratic bloat. So that's why we have, I mean, our whole system, and ours is not as bad as a lot of ours, but our whole system, the political part, which is Parliament, is all oriented on re-election, and the bureaucratic part is to make sure that their job security is maintained, and their job security is all about keeping the processes going that maintain their job, and to make it more lucrative, just put more processes in.
Okay. My job is, as a I can't say it properly, but a respectonomicician, whatever you call me, is to be always able to be able to put some kind of hope, some kind of success story on the table. You've outlined how the political party is such a dangerous organ of government. You've talked about how the prime minister needs to be the equivalent of an accountable CEO. Where do you see the chair of the board? Who is the chair of the board in this framework that you've suggested?
I don't, it's hard to because some of it's labels, but the
Yeah.
prime minister could be head of the Privy Council, like the chair of the board. It could have that title. And then we could have president as the CEO of government, and some governments have that. Some of the more corrupt ones have that because they don't have a true separation from politics, and therein lies the problem: is trying to separate the politics and political parties, and I don't know how we do that without some type of a revolution. Although actually, I would like to see a nonviolent one, just where we just tell the politicians that
Yeah.
once you're elected, you do not belong to the party anymore. You belong to us.
Well, that's exactly, then that's your creed. And I think you've always talked about servant leadership. I
Yeah.
think that's always been your picture. Um, we've covered a lot of ground here, both domestically and internationally. We've talked about how the governance needs to be brought to the table. You talked a bit about how you've been teaching it in the high schools. I would say that one of the things we should advocate for is governance as a standalone, what would you call it, course, standalone subject to be taught in the high schools as an important, we talk about other things that people need to have in their toolbox when they graduate. I think having an understanding of governance would be very, very valuable.
It would probably be more valuable than most of the things they learn. I mean, yes, the foundational things of learning how to use your language well, using how to use math, and having good foundation sciences, those kind of thing, and even arts. Actually, those are all really good. But to bring them all together, governance brings them all together. Governance is what you can take all of those tools you learn and bring them in together into. Um, Supporting a successful life around you, making sure that you're not hijacked. Um, and that unfortunately, I don't think we can, but I don't think we're going to miss be able to um, take ourselves off this track where we're heading to some really ugly um, future. Probably for maybe a few decades of some serious ugly. But that's where I think hopefully the next generation coming up, if they have some knowledge of governance, that they can maybe set up a better system, and get to real democracy. Because that's one of the things actually we have to stop believing politics and politicians when they talk about us having a democracy, and just say no, but we want
Yeah.
it, and you're going to give it to us, or else you're out.
I want to pick you up on something. I had, and everybody has had in their lives, an Uncle David. Did you ever have an Uncle David?
Probably, but
Yeah.
explain to Uncle David.
Well, Uncle David was extraordinarily successful and a remarkable individual. And one day I asked him, I said, "What's been the key to your success?" And he said, in a very drawly English accent, he said, "Oh," he said, "whenever we make a decision, it has to be fair to the new people joining the firm." And then he paused and he looked at me and he said, "You see, Jeremy, we've had our turn."
Yep.
And I think that's a brilliant way to leave this conversation, that you're saying, get the young people now to be educated, because when these cracks and these chasms get wider and things start falling apart, it is precisely the young people coming up that are going to be the ones to re-brick and to reset the foundations.
That's no doubt about it. Actually, I've often said that education is the most important investment any society makes in the future of their economy and culture. And we are seriously neglecting it, not just in governance, but I mean, I've been in the school systems enough to know that our education system is deteriorating rapidly, and we're letting down the young people that will be the future, will be our future, and are in control of our future. And I think that's a lot of the ugly that's coming up. So, but if we can get enough of them actually educated in practical things like governance, then maybe they can help us
Yeah.
get out of that.
I love the way you refer to governance as practical, because that's the part that I'm picking up on from your comments. You've explained very well the philosophy and the issues behind all the democratic issues and so on. But you're also being very pragmatic, very practical. And I think our listeners will really appreciate that, Abby.
I hope so, actually. Like I said, governance can be very complex, but you can't get hung up on the complexity. You have to
Yeah.
get back to what does the organization exist to achieve or support. And that's the foundation. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to do with government. That's what we need to do in our own lives also, actually. Just
Hmm.
we have to define success, and that it's always in draft, but define success and keep ourselves oriented on achieving that success, while also recognizing that if achieving success is abusive, exploitive to other people, that's that's going to turn around and bite us.
Well, I'd like to sign off on something here. You've talked about the issues of abuse and exploitation. We live in a world where those are of what I call social vectors that are becoming more powerful every day. And as my mother would have said, something must be done. So I'm asking our listeners to take this message. Abby, you've explained it extremely well. And on behalf of the listeners and behalf of Respectonomics, thank you. But I think also I'm saying to listeners, get this message out there. Start sharing it, start talking it, have your coffee shop meetings, but get governance on the table and let's get more of it talked about and understood better. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think we better. Well, my sign off is, I'll let you say it this time. The sign off is, I don't know if you remember it from the other podcasts, but you can say it. I'll say it for you if you want, but I think
Go
you
ahead.
should
Yeah.
say it. No, it's you to say, I rest my case.
I rest my case.
Thank you so much, Abby.
You're welcome. Take care.